They were built to feed nations, tame land, and replace animal labor with steel and power. Instead, many of the world's most celebrated tractors left behind a quieter legacy. Fatal accidents repeated across fields, hillsides, and rural roads. Long before safety standards, roll bars, and training became common, these machines entered human environments with forces operators could not see, predict, or escape. Some flipped backward without warning. Others rolled silently on slopes, crushed drivers beneath tons of steel, or turned routine work into sudden death. These were not rare malfunctions or reckless mistakes. They were design realities, normalized risks, and consequences accepted in the name of progress. This is the story of the tractors that transformed agriculture and the lives they claimed along the way. Fordson Model F, the tractor that rolled backward to kill. The Fordson Model F is remembered as the first mass-produced farm tractor, but its most enduring legacy is not efficiency or innovation. It is death. Introduced in 1917 by the Ford Motor Company, the Model F brought mechanized power into fields still shaped by animal labor. That transition occurred faster than safety awareness, faster than training, and faster than the human body could survive its consequences. The danger lay in the tractor's fundamental design. The Model F placed its engine and fuel tank high and forward, creating an elevated center of gravity. Power was delivered directly to the rear wheels through a rigid drivetrain with limited ability to interrupt torque. There was no effective clutch system capable of disengaging power instantly under load. When resistance occurred, the tractor did not stall. It rotated. Rearward rollovers became the machine's signature failure mode. When a plow struck a rock, heavy clay, or a buried root, torque transferred instantly to the rear axle. The front wheels lifted. In less than a second, the tractor pivoted backward around the rear wheels. Operators seated directly above and behind the axle had no protective structure, no restraint, and no escape path. Many were crushed beneath the machine. Others were pinned against the seat and steering column. Survival was rare. The hazard was magnified by farming habits carried over from horse-drawn equipment. Farmers instinctively leaned forward or applied more throttle when resistance was encountered. On the Model F, these reflexes were fatal. More throttle meant more torque. More torque meant faster rotation. The tractor provided no warning and no margin for correction. Once the front lifted, the outcome was already decided. Accident documentation from the 1920s paints a grim picture. Medical journals, rural newspapers, and agricultural bulletins reported repeated fatalities attributed to rear overturns. Victims were often found beneath the tractor with the engine still running. Autopsies described crushed skulls, broken spines, collapsed chests, and asphyxiation. These were not freak accidents. They were mechanical outcomes repeated across farms, seasons, and countries. The Fordson Model F did not discriminate by experience. New operators died. Veteran farmers died. Even cautious users were vulnerable because the rollover occurred faster than human reaction time. Children and bystanders were also killed when tractors flipped near homes or barns. The danger extended beyond the operator to anyone nearby. Ford engineers were aware of the instability early in production. Internal discussions acknowledged that the tractor's geometry made it prone to rear overturns. Yet, meaningful redesign was avoided. Lowering the engine, lengthening the wheelbase, or adding protective structures would have increased cost and reduced output. The business model prioritized affordability and mass production. Safety was treated as an acceptable loss. Legal accountability was almost non-existent. Product liability law was poorly developed, and manufacturers were rarely held responsible for design hazards. Deaths were attributed to misuse, inexperience, or bad luck. Instruction manuals warned against improper operation, but failed to explain rollover mechanics or torque behavior. Responsibility was placed entirely on farmers who had no alternative machinery and no formal training. The problem followed the Model F overseas. Tractors exported to Britain, Ireland, and continental Europe produced the same pattern of deaths. Coroner's reports documented rearward rollovers on uneven fields and slopes. Geography did not matter. Soil composition did not matter. The machine behaved the same everywhere. Farmers attempted their own solutions. Front weights were added, drawbars were extended, hitch points were modified. Some measures reduced risk, others introduced new hazards. None were standardized. No roll bars existed. Protective frames would not become common until decades later, long after the Model F had claimed thousands of lives. The psychological impact on rural communities was profound. Tractors were spoken of as dangerous beasts rather than tools. Some farmers refused to use them at all, returning to horses despite economic pressure. Others accepted the risk as unavoidable, believing mechanization demanded sacrifice. Death became normalized as part of progress. Production of the Fordson Model F continued until 1928. Fatalities declined only when safer designs replaced it, not because the tractor improved, but because it disappeared. The Model F itself never became safe. It was simply retired. In historical context, the Fordson Model F represents the deadliest phase of agricultural mechanization. It introduced power without protection and speed without control. It did not merely expose risk, it created a new category of sudden, unavoidable death. The Model F transformed farming, but it also delivered a brutal lesson written in blood. Mechanization without safety is not innovation. It is acceleration toward preventable death. International Harvester Farmall M, power without protection. The International Harvester Farmall M was introduced in 1939 as a symbol of progress and strength, but its history is inseparable from injury and death. Built by International Harvester to meet the demands of expanding farms, the Farmall M delivered far more power than earlier row crop tractors. What it did not deliver was protection. The result was a machine that dramatically increased productivity while exposing operators to risks they were not prepared to manage. At its core, the Farmall M represented a shift in scale. Producing roughly 40 to 45 horsepower depending on configuration, it was capable of pulling larger plows, heavier implements, and wider equipment than its predecessors. Farmers accustomed to smaller tractors or horses suddenly had access to a machine that could work longer hours under greater load. Yet, the tractor's basic layout remained unchanged from earlier, less powerful designs. Power increased. Safety did not. The most lethal hazard associated with the Farmall M was rollover. Like many tractors of its era, it lacked a rollover protective structure, seat restraints, or any form of operator enclosure. The tractor's relatively narrow front end, especially in tricycle configurations, made it unstable on slopes, uneven ground, and soft soil. Side rollovers occurred frequently during turning, transport, or operation on inclines. Rear rollovers, though less common than with earlier Fordsons, still occurred during heavy pulling or improper hitching. The operator's position amplified the danger. The driver sat high, exposed, and directly above the machine's center of mass. When the tractor tipped, there was no protective zone. Operators were often thrown from the seat and crushed beneath the rear wheel or pinned against the ground. Many fatalities resulted not from impact alone, but from being trapped under thousands of kilograms of steel with no immediate rescue available. Powered takeoff systems added another layer of risk. The Farmall M featured an exposed PTO shaft that rotated at high speed whenever engaged. Guards were minimal or non-existent on early models. Clothing, tools, or limbs could be pulled into the shaft in seconds. Entanglement injuries were often catastrophic, resulting in amputations or death. These incidents were common during belt-driven operations, where farmers worked close to moving components for extended periods. Transport accidents were also frequent. The Farmall M was used not only in fields, but on rural roads to haul wagons and equipment. Braking systems were basic and often uneven between wheels. Steering precision was limited at speed. When pulling heavy loads downhill, loss of control was common. Collisions and rollovers on roads claimed lives far from the field, expanding the tractor's danger beyond agricultural work. Training was virtually non-existent. Most Farmall M operators learned through experience or observation. Instruction manuals focused on operation and maintenance, not hazard recognition. Concepts such as center of gravity, momentum, or rollover dynamics were not explained. Farmers often assumed that more power simply meant faster work, not greater risk. The machine punished that assumption repeatedly. International Harvester was not ignorant of accidents. By the 1940s and 1950s, injury reports were widespread. Yet industry standards placed responsibility on the operator rather than the manufacturer. Safety features were considered optional accessories rather than design requirements. Adding protective structures would have increased cost, reduced accessibility, and potentially limited sales. Market pressure favored output over restraint. The Farmall M's long production run magnified its toll. Built from 1939 to 1953, with more than 270,000 units produced, it remained in service for decades. Even as newer tractors appeared, Farmall M machines continued operating on small and medium farms well into the 1970s. Each year of use extended exposure to hazards that modern safety standards would later deem unacceptable. Rural hospitals and coroners' offices recorded patterns of injury consistent with heavy tractor accidents. Crushed chests, fractured spines, internal bleeding, and fatal head trauma were common findings. Survivors often lived with permanent disability. These outcomes were rarely framed as design failures. They were described as farming accidents, reinforcing the belief that danger was inherent and unavoidable. The Farmall M helped define modern agriculture, but it also normalized risk at a deadly scale. Its power outpaced the safety culture of its time. Farmers gained efficiency, but paid with lives and limbs. The machine did not malfunction. It did exactly what it was built to do, without regard for what happened to the person operating it. In retrospect, the International Harvester Farmall M stands as a warning rather than a triumph. It proves that power without protection is not progress, it is exposure. The Farmall M did not merely work fields, it reshaped the boundaries of acceptable danger, leaving a legacy written not in acres plowed, but in casualties endured. John Deere Model A, torque that overturned generations.
The John Deere Model A is often celebrated as a cornerstone of American agricultural mechanization, but behind its reputation lies a long history of fatal accidents rooted in torque, traction, and absence of protection. Introduced in 1934 by the John Deere, the Model A delivered unprecedented low-speed pulling power to farms still transitioning from animal labor. That power, combined with primitive safety design, created a tractor that overturned bodies as reliably as it overturned soil.
The defining characteristic of the Model A was torque. Its two-cylinder engine produced strong rotational force at low engine speed, ideal for plowing and heavy drawbar work. Farmers valued this trait because it allowed the tractor to keep moving under load where smaller machines stalled. However, this same torque became lethal when resistance exceeded traction. Instead of slipping or disengaging, the tractor transferred force directly into rotation around the rear axle. Rearward rollovers were the most deadly outcome. When a plow struck a rock, stump, or compacted soil, the rear wheels continued driving while the front lifted. The Model A's relatively short wheelbase and high rear axle made this rotation rapid. Operators seated high and close to the axle had no time to react. The tractor could flip backward in less than a second, crushing the driver beneath its mass. Side rollovers were also common. Many Model A tractors were configured with narrow front ends designed for row crop cultivation. This configuration reduced stability on slopes, uneven terrain, or during sharp turns. Combined with steel wheels on early models or poorly maintained tires later on, lateral traction loss frequently resulted in tip-overs. Without rollover protection, the operator was exposed directly to the ground or pinned under the machine. Unlike later tractors, the Model A offered no protective systems of any kind. There was no rollover protective structure, no seat belt, and no guarded operator zone. The driver sat exposed, elevated, and vulnerable. When overturns occurred, survival depended entirely on chance. Many fatalities resulted not from the initial impact, but from being trapped beneath the tractor, unable to breathe or escape. Power takeoff-related deaths further compounded the danger. The Model A used exposed PTO shafts and belt pulleys to drive stationary equipment. Farmers often worked close to these moving parts for long periods. Loose clothing, tools, or limbs could be caught instantly. Entanglement injuries were typically catastrophic, leading to dismemberment or death. Guards were minimal, and safety warnings were vague or absent. The tractor's success amplified its death toll. Production ran from 1934 to 1952, with more than 400,000 units built. The Model A became a fixture on American farms for decades. Even as newer models entered the market, older units remained in daily use, often passed down through families. Each generation inherited not only the machine, but its hazards. Training and awareness lagged behind adoption. Most operators learned through observation rather than instruction. Manuals focused on lubrication and adjustment, not hazard avoidance. Concepts such as torque-induced rollover were not explained. Farmers assumed experience equaled safety. The tractor repeatedly disproved that belief. Medical and agricultural records from the 1930s through the 1960s document recurring fatal patterns. Crushed skulls, spinal fractures, chest compression, and internal hemorrhage were common causes of death. Many victims were found alone in fields hours after the accident, underscoring how quickly rollovers occurred and how little opportunity existed for rescue. John Deere was not unaware of these incidents. Engineers understood torque behavior and stability limits, yet design changes were incremental and slow. Adding protective structures would have increased cost and altered appearance, potentially reducing sales. Industry norms placed responsibility on the operator rather than the manufacturer. Danger was considered inherent to farming, not a design problem to be solved. Cultural acceptance reinforced the risk. Tractors were symbols of strength and independence. Acknowledging danger was often framed as weakness. Fatalities were described as unfortunate accidents rather than predictable outcomes. This mindset delayed adoption of safety standards that could have saved lives. The Model A's legacy endured even as it faded from production. Many units remained operational into the 1970s and beyond, long after safer designs existed. Rollovers continued to occur, claiming older farmers and younger family members alike. The machine outlived its era, carrying its risks forward. In historical perspective, the John Deere Model A represents a pivotal but deadly phase of mechanization. It delivered power without protection and efficiency without restraint. Its torque reshaped agriculture, but it also reshaped cemeteries in rural America. The Model A did not fail mechanically. It failed structurally, by placing immense force into human environments without accounting for human vulnerability. It overturned generations not only through progress, but through preventable death. Ferguson TE20, the silent rollover machine. The Ferguson TE20 earned a reputation as a simple, reliable tractor that helped mechanize small farms across Europe, Australia, and parts of Asia after the Second World War. It was compact, affordable, and easy to operate. Those same qualities, however, masked a deadly flaw. The TE20 did not announce danger with noise or violence. It killed quietly, through sudden rollovers that gave operators little warning and even less chance to escape. Introduced in the late 1940s, the TE20 was designed around efficiency and accessibility. It was lighter and smaller than many American tractors, making it ideal for narrow fields and mixed farming. Farmers trusted it because it felt manageable. That trust proved dangerous. The tractor's lightweight, short wheelbase, and high center of gravity combined to create instability that was often underestimated. Rearward rollovers were the most lethal hazard. The TE20 featured a 3-point hitch system that transferred draft forces directly to the rear axle. When an implement encountered resistance, the tractor reacted instantly. Instead of losing traction or stalling, the rear axle rotated upward. The front wheels lifted rapidly, often without audible strain from the engine. Operators described the sensation as sudden and silent. By the time the front rose, the tractor was already beyond recovery. Unlike earlier tractors that gave warning through vibration or engine labor, the TE20 flipped quickly and smoothly. This lack of sensory warning contributed to its lethality. Farmers, accustomed to reacting to engine sound or wheel slip, had no such cues. The rollover occurred in less than a second. Many operators never realized what was happening until the tractor was already on top of them. Side rollovers were also common. The TE20's narrow stance and light front end made it vulnerable on slopes and uneven ground. Turning with mounted implements raised the center of gravity further, increasing rollover risk. On hillsides, soft soil, or field edges, the tractor could tip sideways with minimal provocation. Without any rollover protection, the operator was fully exposed. The seating position worsened outcomes. The driver sat high and forward, directly in the path of the tractor's rotation. When rollovers occurred, operators were frequently thrown backward or downward, where the machine's weight pinned them to the ground. Crushing injuries to the chest, pelvis, and skull were common. Many victims suffocated under the tractor before help could arrive. The TE20 also lacked basic safety interlocks. There was no effective way to disengage power rapidly under load. Brakes were mechanical and uneven, particularly on worn machines. Steering control diminished sharply when the front wheels lifted even slightly. Once instability began, the operator had no mechanical assistance to regain control. The tractor's widespread adoption amplified its death toll. Tens of thousands of TE20 units were sold worldwide. Many were operated by farmers with little formal training, including older operators and younger family members. Because the tractor appeared approachable and unintimidating, safety caution was often relaxed. The machine's danger lay not in brutality, but in deception. Accident reports from rural regions describe recurring patterns. Operators found crushed beneath overturned tractors in fields, orchards, and paddocks. Many incidents occurred during routine tasks such as plowing, towing, or working on slight inclines. There were no dramatic failures, no explosions, no obvious defects. The tractor behaved as designed. The design itself was the problem. Manufacturers and agricultural authorities were slow to respond. At the time, rollover protective structures were not standard, and fatalities were attributed to misuse or terrain rather than engineering. Instruction manuals emphasized efficiency and implement compatibility, not rollover dynamics. Farmers were warned to operate carefully, but not informed of the specific forces that made rollovers inevitable under certain conditions. Cultural attitudes reinforced acceptance. Farming communities treated tractor accidents as part of rural life. Survivors adapted by modifying habits or adding homemade counterweights. Some added front ballast in attempts to stabilize the tractor, with mixed results. These measures reduced risk marginally but did not eliminate the fundamental instability. The TE20 remained in service for decades. Many units continued operating long after production ended, often without upgrades or protective retrofits. As time passed, aging operators faced declining reaction speed, increasing vulnerability. Fatalities continued into the late 20th century, long after safer tractor designs were available. In retrospect, the Ferguson TE20 represents a critical lesson in agricultural safety. It demonstrated that danger does not always announce itself through size, noise, or aggression. A machine can be efficient, popular, and lethal at the same time. Its rollovers were not dramatic. They were sudden, quiet, and final. The TE20 helped modernize farming, but it did so without protecting the people it served. Its legacy is not only measured in fields worked, but in lives lost to a machine that gave no warning before it killed. Massey Ferguson 35. Productivity at the cost of lives. The Massey Ferguson 35 is remembered as one of the most successful tractors of the 20th century, yet its record of fatalities tells a darker story. Introduced in 1956 by Massey Ferguson, the MF-35 was designed to deliver higher productivity to small and medium farms at a price that encouraged rapid adoption. It succeeded commercially beyond expectations. What it did not do was protect the people who operated it. Increased efficiency came with increased exposure to fatal risk. The MF-35 marked a transition period in tractor design. Power output increased significantly compared to earlier models, yet safety architecture remained minimal. The tractor featured a compact frame, short wheelbase, and relatively high center of gravity, particularly when equipped with mounted implements. These characteristics made it agile in tight fields, but dangerously unstable under load. Rollover accidents became its most common and deadly failure mode. Rearward rollovers occurred frequently during plowing and towing. The MF-35 utilized a three-point hitch system that transferred draft forces directly to the rear axle. When an implement struck resistance, torque rose instantly. Instead of stalling or slipping, the tractor rotated upward around the rear wheels. The front end lifted rapidly, often without warning. Operators seated directly above the axle had less than a second to react. Many were crushed beneath the machine before they could even release the throttle. Side rollovers were equally lethal. The MF-35's narrow track width made it vulnerable on slopes, field edges, and uneven terrain. Turning while pulling mounted equipment raised the center of gravity further. In these conditions, lateral stability margins were thin. A small depression, rut, or soft patch of soil was enough to initiate a sideways tip. Without rollover protection, the operator was thrown from the seat or pinned under the rear wheel. The seating and control layout worsened injury outcomes. The operator sat high and exposed, with no protective zone. There were no seat belts, no roll bars, and no reinforced structure to absorb impact. When rollovers occurred, survival depended entirely on luck. Many fatalities were caused not by the initial impact, but by chest compression and suffocation as victims were trapped beneath the tractor's weight. Power takeoff-related deaths added to the toll. Early MF-35 tractors featured exposed PTO shafts and minimal guarding. Operators often worked close to rotating components while adjusting belts or implements. Clothing or limbs could be pulled in instantly. These incidents frequently resulted in traumatic amputations or fatal injuries. Such accidents were common enough to be recognized, yet design changes remained limited. Road transport accidents also increased as the MF-35 was used beyond fields. Farmers relied on it to haul wagons and equipment on rural roads. Braking systems were mechanical and often uneven between wheels. Steering precision diminished under load. When pulling heavy trailers downhill, loss of control was frequent. Rollovers and collisions occurred far from farms, extending the tractor's danger into public spaces. Training lagged behind adoption. Many operators learned through observation rather than formal instruction. Manuals emphasized maintenance and efficiency, not hazard awareness. Concepts such as center of gravity, rollover dynamics, and torque transfer were rarely explained. Farmers assumed that experience equaled safety. The MF-35 repeatedly proved otherwise. Medical and agricultural records from the 1950s through the 1970s document consistent injury patterns. Crushed skulls, spinal fractures, pelvic injuries, and internal bleeding were common causes of death. Victims were often found alone hours after accidents occurred. The speed of rollovers left little opportunity for rescue, particularly in isolated rural areas. Manufacturers were aware of these outcomes. By the time the MF-35 was widely distributed, rollover fatalities were well documented across the industry. Yet safety features such as rollover protective structures were not standard. They were considered optional additions, not essential design elements. Cost, appearance, and market competition outweighed operator protection. Responsibility was placed on the user rather than the machine. The MF-35's global reach amplified its impact. Produced in large numbers and exported worldwide, it operated across varied terrains and farming practices. Each region added its own risk factors, but the underlying design hazards remained constant. Even as safer tractors entered the market, MF-35 units remained in service for decades, continuing to claim lives long after their introduction. In hindsight, the Massey Ferguson 35 represents a critical failure of balance. It delivered productivity, affordability, and reliability, but ignored the predictable consequences of increased power without protection. Its success normalized risk at a scale that farming communities accepted as inevitable. The MF-35 did not malfunction. It performed exactly as designed. That design simply failed to account for human vulnerability. Its legacy is therefore divided. It advanced agriculture while quietly increasing fatality rates. Productivity rose. Safety did not. And for many operators, the cost of progress was their life. Allis-Chalmers WC, when mechanization outpaced safety. The Allis-Chalmers WC was one of the earliest tractors to bring mechanized power to small and medium farms on a large scale. Introduced in 1933 by Allis-Chalmers, it represented progress during a period when agriculture was desperate for efficiency. Yet the WC also exposed a critical imbalance. Mechanization advanced rapidly, while safety remained almost non-existent. The result was a tractor that transformed farming productivity while quietly contributing to a rising toll of serious injuries and deaths. The WC was designed to replace horses, not to protect operators. Its four-cylinder engine delivered more consistent pulling power than animal labor, allowing farmers to plow faster and work larger areas. However, the tractor's physical design reflected early experimentation rather than refined engineering. The machine had a relatively short wheelbase, a high seating position, and minimal weight on the front axle. These features made it effective in fields, but dangerously unstable under certain conditions. Rearward rollovers were among the most deadly hazards. When the WC pulled mounted or hitched equipment, resistance transferred directly through the drivetrain to the rear wheels. If a plow struck a rock, root, or compacted soil, torque increased instantly. Instead of stalling, the tractor rotated backward around the rear axle. The front wheels lifted abruptly, often without warning. Operators seated directly above the axle had no time to react. Many were crushed beneath the tractor before they could disengage power. Side rollovers were equally common. Early WC models often used narrow front wheel configurations to improve maneuverability between crop rows. While effective for cultivation, this design reduced lateral stability. On uneven terrain, slopes, or when turning sharply with equipment attached, the tractor could tip sideways easily. Without rollover protection, operators were thrown from the seat or pinned under the rear wheel, frequently sustaining fatal injuries. The operator environment offered no protection. The WC had no rollover protective structure, no seat belt, and no reinforced operator zone. The driver sat exposed, elevated, and vulnerable. When an overturn occurred, survival depended entirely on chance. Many fatalities were caused by chest compression and suffocation rather than blunt trauma, as victims were trapped beneath the machine's weight. Power takeoff systems introduced additional danger. The WC used exposed rotating shafts and belt pulleys to power stationary equipment. Guards were minimal or absent. Farmers often worked close to moving components while adjusting belts or feeding machinery. Loose clothing or tools could be pulled in instantly. Entanglement injuries frequently resulted in amputations or death. These incidents were common enough to be recognized, yet rarely addressed through design changes. Road transport accidents expanded the tractor's danger beyond the field. Farmers increasingly used the WC to haul wagons and equipment on rural roads. Braking systems were basic and often uneven. Steering precision diminished under load. When pulling heavy trailers downhill, loss of control was frequent. Rollovers and collisions occurred on roads never designed for mechanized traffic, increasing fatalities involving both operators and bystanders. Training was almost non-existent. Most farmers learned to operate the WC through observation or trial and error. Instruction manuals emphasized lubrication, adjustment, and efficiency, not hazard awareness. Concepts such as torque transfer, center of gravity, or rollover dynamics were not explained. Farmers assumed familiarity with horses translated into competence with machines. The WC repeatedly disproved that assumption. Medical records and rural newspapers from the 1930s and 1940s document recurring patterns of injury. Crushed skulls, spinal fractures, pelvic injuries, and internal bleeding were common. Many victims were found hours after accidents occurred, alone in fields or near barns. The speed of rollovers left little opportunity for rescue, especially in isolated farming communities. Manufacturers were aware of accidents, but industry norms placed responsibility on the operator. Safety features were viewed as optional or unnecessary. Adding protective structures would have increased cost and reduced market appeal during a period when affordability determined survival. Deaths were framed as farming accidents rather than predictable mechanical outcomes. The WC's long service life magnified its impact. Even after production ended, thousands remained in use for decades. As tractors aged and operators grew older, reaction times slowed while risks remained unchanged. Fatalities continued long after safer designs became available. In historical perspective, the Allis-Chalmers WC illustrates a defining failure of early mechanization. Power was introduced faster than understanding. Machines entered human environments without accounting for human limits. The tractor did not malfunction. It behaved exactly as designed. The WC helped modernize agriculture, but it did so without safeguarding the people who depended on it. Mechanization outpaced safety, and the cost was paid in crushed bodies and silent fields. The Allis-Chalmers WC stands as a reminder that progress measured only in productivity can become lethal when protection is ignored. MTZ-80 Belarus. Brutal utility in dangerous terrain. The MTZ-80 Belarus tractor was never designed to be comfortable, refined, or forgiving. It was designed to work relentlessly in terrain that destroyed lesser machines. Introduced in 1974 by the Minsk Tractor Works, the MTZ-80 became one of the most widely used tractors in Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and parts of Africa. Its reputation for durability is undisputed. Its record of fatalities is less discussed, but equally real. The MTZ-80 embodied a philosophy of brutal utility that placed productivity far above operator safety. The tractor was built for harsh environments, collective farms, mountainous regions, forests, and undeveloped rural infrastructure demanded machines that could tolerate neglect, poor fuel quality, and extreme weather. The MTZ-80 delivered exactly that. Its simple mechanical systems allowed it to operate with minimal maintenance. However, that same simplicity eliminated safeguards that could have prevented deaths. Safety was considered secondary, if it was considered at all. Rollover accidents were the primary cause of fatalities associated with the MTZ-80. The tractor's high ground clearance, rigid suspension, and relatively narrow track width made it unstable on slopes and uneven ground. These conditions were common in the regions where the tractor was most heavily used. Hillsides, muddy fields, forest paths, and poorly graded roads were routine operating environments. In such terrain, the margin between stability and disaster was thin. Side rollovers occurred frequently. When operating on slopes or embankments, the MTZ-80's rigid rear axle did not compensate for uneven ground. One wheel lifting or slipping was often enough to initiate a sideways tip. The tractor lacked any rollover protective structure on most early and mid-production models. When it tipped, the operator was exposed directly to the ground. Crushing injuries were common, particularly to the chest and pelvis. Rearward rollovers were also documented. Heavy towing, improper hitching, or pulling stuck equipment could cause the front end to lift. The MTZ-80's engine delivered strong torque at low speed, a necessity for agricultural work, but dangerous when resistance increased suddenly. Once rotation began, the tractor offered no effective way to disengage power rapidly. Operators often had no time to react before the machine flipped. The operator environment amplified the risk. Early MTZ-80 tractors were delivered with minimal cabs or open stations. Seatbelts were absent or unused. Visibility was limited, especially in forested or uneven areas. Steering required constant correction, and brake systems were basic. In emergency situations, control degraded rapidly. When accidents occurred, survival depended largely on luck. Road transport fatalities were common as well. The MTZ-80 was frequently used on public and rural roads to haul trailers, logs, or agricultural produce. These roads were often poorly maintained, unpaved, or narrow. Combined with the tractor's high center of gravity and limited braking performance, loss of control was frequent. Rollovers into ditches, embankments, or on slopes claimed lives far from fields. Training standards were minimal. Many operators learned through necessity rather than instruction. On collective farms, tractors were often assigned to workers with limited experience. Manuals emphasized operation and repair, not the hazard recognition. Concepts such as rollover dynamics, weight transfer, and terrain assessment were rarely taught. Operators adapted through experience, but experience often came at the cost of injury or death. The political and economic context reinforced acceptance of risk. In Soviet and post-Soviet systems, productivity targets mattered more than individual safety. Tractor accidents were viewed as occupational hazards rather than design failures. Reporting was inconsistent, and fatalities were rarely attributed to mechanical shortcomings. This culture delayed adoption of protective structures long after they were common elsewhere. The MTZ-80's longevity magnified its impact. Hundreds of thousands were produced, and many remain in service decades later. Aging machines operate without upgrades, often with worn brakes, loose steering, and deteriorated tires. Operators are frequently older as well, increasing vulnerability. Fatalities continue not because the tractor is poorly built, but because it was never designed to protect human life. In mountainous regions and rough terrain, the MTZ-80 earned a reputation as both indispensable and dangerous. Farmers trusted it to go where others could not. That trust often placed them in environments where rollover risk was constant. The tractor survived conditions that killed its operators. The MTZ-80 Belarus represents a stark truth of industrial history. Durability without safety is not resilience, it is indifference. The tractor fulfilled its role within the system that created it, prioritizing output over protection. Lives were considered expendable costs of productivity. The MTZ-80 did not fail mechanically. It succeeded exactly as intended. What it failed to do was acknowledge human vulnerability in dangerous terrain. Its legacy is therefore double-edged, a symbol of endurance, and a machine that claimed lives through a design that valued survival of steel over survival of people. Kubota compact tractors. Small size, high fatality risk. Kubota. Compact tractors are often marketed as safer alternatives to full-sized agricultural machines. Their smaller frames, lower horsepower, and residential appeal create an impression of reduced danger. In practice, these tractors have been involved in a disproportionate number of fatal accidents, particularly among small landowners, hobby farmers, and first-time operators. The risk does not come from size alone, but from how compact tractors are used, misunderstood, and trusted. Kubota entered the global tractor market with a focus on compact utility machines designed for versatility. These tractors were ideal for mowing, light tillage, landscaping, and property maintenance. Their accessibility expanded tractor ownership beyond professional farmers to homeowners, retirees, and part-time operators. This shift fundamentally changed the risk profile. Machines, once operated by trained agricultural workers, were now used by individuals with limited experience in heavy equipment. Rollover accidents account for the majority of fatalities involving Kubota compact tractors. Despite their smaller footprint, many models have a high center of gravity relative to width, especially when equipped with loaders, backhoes, or rear implements. Front-end loaders raise the center of mass significantly, reducing lateral stability. Operators often underestimate this effect because the tractor appears manageable and slow. Slopes are a critical hazard. Compact tractors are frequently used on residential hillsides, drainage ditches, embankments, and uneven lawns. These environments differ from flat agricultural fields and present constant rollover risk. A minor change in terrain, a hidden hole, or a sudden shift in load can initiate a tip. Side rollovers occur quickly, often faster than an operator can react. Rear rollovers are another deadly scenario. Compact tractors are commonly used for pulling stumps, logs, or stuck equipment. Improper hitching above the drawbar dramatically increases the likelihood of a backward flip. The torque generated, even at low horsepower, is sufficient to rotate the tractor around the rear axle in seconds. Many operators are unaware of this mechanism until it is too late. A critical factor in Kubota-related fatalities is the absence or misuse of rollover protective structures. While many models are equipped with ROPS, they are often folded down to clear trees, garages, or low structures. Once lowered, they are rarely returned to the upright position. Without ROPS, the tractor offers no survival space during a rollover. Fatal crushing injuries occur when the operator is pinned beneath the machine. Seatbelt use remains inconsistent. On compact tractors, operators frequently dismount to adjust implements or inspect work. This routine movement discourages seatbelt use, even when ROPS are present. In a rollover, an unbelted operator can be thrown from the seat and crushed by the tractor or attachments. Survivability depends on remaining within the protective zone, something many operators do not realize. The quiet operation of compact tractors contributes to risk. Kubota machines are known for smooth engines and low noise. This reduces perceived danger and encourages complacency. Operators may work alone, without spotters or communication, increasing the likelihood that an accident becomes fatal due to delayed rescue. Another overlooked hazard is road transport. Compact tractors are often driven short distances on public or private roads without lighting, reflective markings, or adequate braking for towed loads. Narrow tires and high attachment loads compromise stability during turns or when encountering road edges. Rollovers into ditches are a recurring cause of death. Training deficiencies are central to the problem. Many Kubota compact tractors are sold through dealerships that emphasize convenience and ease of use. Safety instruction is minimal. Buyers often receive operational demonstrations rather than hazard education. Concepts such as slope limits, load transfer, and rollover dynamics are rarely explained in depth. Demographics amplify the danger. Compact tractors are popular among older operators. Age-related factors such as slower reaction time, reduced strength, and limited mobility increase fatality risk. When rollovers occur, escape is unlikely. Injuries that might be survivable for younger operators often become fatal. Kubota has improved safety features over time, expanding ROPS availability and warning labels. However, design improvements cannot compensate for misuse, terrain choice, and operator overconfidence. The tractor's function is designed. The danger emerges from how their apparent simplicity masks real mechanical risk. The fatality pattern associated with Kubota compact tractors exposes a broader issue. Smaller machines do not guarantee safety. When accessibility expands faster than education, risk spreads into populations unprepared to manage it. Kubota compact tractors are not uniquely defective. They are dangerous because they blur the line between household tool and industrial machine. Their size encourages trust, but their physics remain unforgiving. In that gap between perception and reality, lives are lost. The lesson is clear. Compact does not mean safe. Without training, discipline, and respect for terrain, small tractors can be just as deadly as the largest machines ever built.